They're scared to death of me. They think I'm going to hurt them physically and kill them or what, they're scared of me. And I went down to the shop and I had to walk around the end of my desk and the gun was still laying there. And I thought to myself, I might as well just finish this. I'm too far gone. I mean, I got PTSD and I'm looking at the symptoms, but nobody even believes me. I'm trying to explain what's going on in my life and nobody's listening.
What's going on, guys? The question of the day, the question of the hour, like always. How are you? Again, seriously, I want to know. How are you? Feel free to hit me up. chad.campese@gmail.com. How's your life, your health, your relationships, your kids, your job, even your faith? Could you use some hope, healing, peace, maybe even a little bit of adventure? That's the only reason we're here. And our goal is to provide that using a spirit-driven focus that we believe produces life-altering results. This is a zero filter, zero filler, zero judgment show, so there is no room for little ears here. Reminder, you could literally be saving lives and families by inviting others to hope, healing, and peace simply by liking and subscribing, leaving a review, share this podcast on social media, shout it out so that people can find it easily. Today we have Mr. Scott Geiselhart. He is a father, a business owner, and a 20-year veteran of the Frazee Fire Department. We talk PTSD, drug addiction, suicide, and some godly intervention to bring him back on track with an invite to peace. All right, guys, without further ado, Scott Geiselhart. All right, man. So we're talking faith and first responders for the most part. And I'm kind of curious. I've heard your story a few different times in a few different ways. I guess, when I hear you talk and I hear about the low points in your life, is there one, and I have one in mind, obviously. I'm curious if it'd be the same one, but if you had that low point, that time when you thought, this is it. It doesn't get worse than this. I can't come back from this. This is as low as it goes. My failures, my faults. There's no going any lower. And what comes to mind when I ask that?
Probably when I was at my limit with the meth. I was doing a line an hour and I didn't sleep. I mean, for like 2 years I was doing that. And I just never ever thought I was going to be free of meth. And the anger, that monster I became. And when I yelled at my ex-girlfriend and my sons, and just seeing the look on their face that they were scared to death of me, that, I was actually putting the fear into them, that they thought I was going to physically hurt them. And it's just, I lost it. I wasn't in control of myself anymore. And I figured, well, there's no other way out. There's no way of getting better.
Okay, so paint that picture for us. When you say meth, I'm assuming methamphetamine, drugs, yes?
Yes.
And then as far as professions go, right, I did your intro, everybody knows, is that during the time that you were in the fire service?
Yep, I started doing meth probably 10 years prior to my suicide attempt. So probably been by about 2004. I started doing meth as a firefighter, worked up through the ranks to assistant chief, and I was in line to be the next chief, and I knew I was a train wreck and my days were numbered. I mean, I just wanted to be dead, and I stepped away from the fire department and went back down through the ranks to captain, down to the yellow helmet, down to hating the fire department, not making trainings, being that negative person in the fire department. And life just did a complete flip-flop on me.
And we're talking, how many years in? You said 10 years in when you started using?
I started doing meth, probably about 10 years in. And it wasn't with first responders. It was with other business owners and other upstanding citizens. That's why I'm like, man, if these guys can party, and use this stuff and have businesses, I can do the same. But I used it to keep awake and to stay awake from my nightmares.
That was going to be my next question. I was curious, why begin? Why do we start that in the first place?
I was just chasing something different. It was just the nightmares were getting to me, and I didn't start doing it for the nightmares. I just started doing it to instead of being at a campfire with my friends, I'd sit there and stare at the fire and think about car accidents and fire things. And the mess seemed like it was a horrible coping skill that I gained. It wasn't a good one. And it just kept my mind busy and kept me busy so I wouldn't think about things.
All right, so we're gonna keep going back, paint that picture, think about things. What are we thinking about? What's getting to us? What's eating at us that we think we need to go down that avenue?
Well, it seemed like everything was going wrong in my life. And my shop, I mean, I built a brand new shop in 2010, and the pressures of the business and having to work longer hours, and that gave me the energy to work longer hours. And
When you
the
say shop,
isolation.
I'm assuming like a car shop, or what? What kind of shop are you doing?
Yep, it was not a repair shop. I own my own business. And
Oh, so you're like all the firefighters that do one thing and then on their off days do something completely different. And
yeah, well, I was
yeah.
a volunteer in a small town. So,
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
yeah, we didn't do it for a career. It was volunteer. So when we got done cutting somebody out of a car or going to a house fire, either we'd go home, go to sleep, try to get some sleep before work in the morning, or we'd go back to work. Or if we weren't working, it was in between, we'd go to the bar and get drunk.
And this
And
is
yeah,
the volunteer fire department you're talking about.
we didn't do debriefings after our calls. We just, suck it up. Go back to
Gotcha.
doing
So
what you're doing before the call.
when you said earlier that you rose through the ranks and became assistant chief, and we're thinking, is that then after you got into paid fire service, or how does that work?
No, I was a volunteer my whole life.
The whole time. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, not my whole life, but the whole 24 years. Yeah, I was a volunteer in a small town.
Gotcha. So
And
this car shop is actually what's providing you with your money, your livelihood.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know any of that. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so we start. Go ahead.
And that's kind of what I didn't prepare myself was for, knowing the people. It's a small town, 1,300 population, tight community. The school was in our town. So, and as a business owner, I got to know a lot of the community, and I was on the city council. So when we were going on these calls, a lot of times I'd know them, or somebody in the fire department would know them, or it might even be a firefighter's relative or something. And that's a whole different ballgame when you're cutting somebody out of a car that you recognize, or maybe it was the bartender that served you the drink the night before, which happened. And she passed. So, I mean, it gets to you. And
Yeah.
even as much as you say it's not going to, it gets you. Otherwise, you're not human.
Okay. So walk that back for me. So you're the bartender that served you the night before. You're out with your friends doing your thing at the bar. Tell me that story. How'd that work?
Well, we were down at the bar, which I normally went to after work, and shooting some pool with a friend of mine. This bartender, she was just all bubbly and full of energy, and just always had us smiling. It was just fun to hang around with. And she would serve us drinks. I mean, as soon as we walk in the door, she'd have a beer sitting on the bar for us. And one night I went in and she had a tennis shoe necklace. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's something I could get my girlfriend back then. This is, 15, 20 years ago. And I decided that I was going to buy it. And she told me where I could buy one. And next morning, the pager went off and we were dispatched out to a bad car accident. And it was bad. I mean, the car was totally destroyed. Ran a stop sign, got caught up with a 1-ton dually with a trailer, fifth wheel trailer on the back, and it destroyed the car. And one of my friends said, "Hey, you don't want to go see this one. You got to stay away. You know who that is?" And it's like, I pushed him away. I said, "No, don't tell me." I said, "I got a job to do. I mean, don't tell me. A lot of times
Right.
you don't recognize them when they're in that condition."
Yeah.
But when I got in there and went to cut the battery cables to get the jaws of life so we could start cutting, I cut the battery cables, but that necklace was laying right on top of the battery, and that car had rolled and gotten just destroyed, but the necklace was right there. And then I was one of the two guys that went in and bear hugged her body and pulled the body out. And I tell you, that messes you up. And after that, I'd be in the bar with the same friend, and we'd be shooting pool or whatever, and some girls would come over and we'd be chit-chatting with them. And I don't remember being this rude, but apparently I was an ass, and kind of pushed him away and just made some smart comments to him. And after I started going through counseling, I found out that it was a trigger. The girls were wearing necklaces, and I would see the necklace, and it would make me angry to where, here they're out having fun and they're full of life, and that bartender's gone. What did she do to deserve that? And it was weird how a trigger, a necklace, a beautiful necklace could be a trigger. It wasn't the same necklace. It was just a necklace, but it reminded me of that. And once I worked through that and talked with the counselor about that, I recognize for what it is. It's a beautiful necklace. It's not, something I did wrong or I failed that girl because it was out of our hands.
So this, you mentioned talking with a counselor. I'm assuming this wasn't until years later that you ended up doing that?
Yes, it was in 2014 when I finally reached out for help after my suicide attempt.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So heading back to the scenes that you saw that got you into the road of meth and that kind of anger that you said you had inside. We're going to go just kind of the suicide route, all that meth you were using. Kind of take me through how this builds and builds and builds and gets us to the point that we're thinking that to end our life.
Well, it seemed like the more the PTSD grew and the more I did drugs, meth, alcohol, whatever it was, like I said, it was bad coping skills. So I didn't know what PTSD was. I had no idea. I'm trying to look at myself in the mirror and say, who are you turning into? Because this is not the person you used to be. And my girlfriend used to tell me that all the time. She says, you've changed. And she told everybody in the fire department, Scott's yelling at us at home and he's out of control. The anger is just out of control. And, nobody really helped her, because I made the excuse. I was stressed out from work. I'm basically a one-man show and trying to run a shop and run a family and pay all the bills and fire department stuff. And I was being pulled so many different directions that I made the excuse I'm just stressed out. And even when the police came and asked me about it, somebody called and said that they think you're suicidal. It's just stress. I was good at lying and, making excuses and portraying somebody I wasn't. Inside, there's no way I'm going to tell police officers or friends of mine that I'm suicidal. To me, that was a weakness. And
well, I can't. I got to go back there. So there was a time that it had gotten so bad with your girlfriend and your sons living at home that one of them called the police on you, or did somebody else call the police and have them stop out, or how'd that work?
I still don't know. They never told me. She said she didn't, and it doesn't matter if she did or didn't. Somebody did. But somebody's seen something, and I'm sure it was one of my anger outbursts. Maybe somebody from a distance seen it when I was at the shop or something. Because I could be a really nice guy in front of my customers, but I had friends that said that they walked up to the shop at night and they could hear me in there yelling and thought I was in a fight with somebody. And I had a friend walk in the shop thinking I was actually in a fight with somebody. I was in a fight with myself.
You were by yourself in the shop and they heard you?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
And I was yelling at myself so much, that it was weird. I mean, I was just so angry all the time. If something broke on a car that was, a broken bolt or a part didn't fit, or I would just go off. I had no fuse. I mean, you talk about short fuse. I didn't have a fuse, but I could control it as far as who was around. Like my customers, they wouldn't see it if they're in the shop. I'd bite my tongue for the most part and take it home and take it out on my kids. And it was verbal abuse.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit, because people who are listening to this probably already know my story, so I'm not going to go there. But with yours, a lot of times, and people I talk to, what I see is our families are the ones we're most comfortable treating the worst. And I'm curious, like you said, your customers, you were nice to them, you were nice to the police, you were nice to people that were around you. Is there a reason you feel like it's so easy to treat our kids and our families the worst?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just know I felt like crap when I did it. And it was like I was third person wanting to get myself out of there as fast as possible because I knew I was hurting them. But when I left, for a long time, I just threatened suicide. It's like, and I said things to my kids that no kid should ever hear, calling them freeloaders and stuff. But I didn't mean it, but I was so angry. The words came out and it's like, why are you saying that stuff? You don't mean it. And I'd threaten suicide or to burn the house down or to burn the shop down. And so nobody could have it because I felt like I was working so hard and I wasn't getting anything for all the work I was putting in.
And again, you're working for free at the fire department while still working at the shop to make your living.
Yeah. I mean, when the pager went off day and night, whenever, I'd be one of the first ones down to the fire station until back in 2012 when my girlfriend left and took our sons with. And then I had nothing to go home to anymore.
What was the final straw that she finally said enough is enough?
I think she had about 10 years enough is enough. And she should have left, to be honest with you, she should have left a long time before that. I think I was pushing them away to distance myself from them. So in my mind, nobody would miss me when I die. And it sounds kind of strange to say that, but I've heard that with other people saying similar things too. And I basically I was pushing everybody out of my life so I could justify killing myself.
And what was do you remember the just that final incident with her saying I'm out? What happened that night or what happened that day that she finally made that decision?
I think she'd done it a few times before, and yeah, we were both done. I just wanted to be dead. And I mean, being alive, or being awake for 2 years straight on meth, I was not somebody you really wanted to be around. I never went home, never slept. I don't know. I don't even know how I made it through those 2 years. I mean, my mind was, I was a functioning meth head. I wasn't like the person that you see that's doing drugs that's all scabbed out and jittery. I was running a shop. People didn't know I was doing meth. They thought I was stressed. Definitely, they knew I was busy, but they didn't understand the stress or the meth part because I didn't show any of the symptoms from that they would have known to look for. And then it got to a point where I was blaming God for everything. I basically feel I turned on him. And some of the things that happened in that shop, I can't explain it, but I fell out of the ceiling twice, 13 feet, and onto concrete, and no scratch. It was just weird. I mean, I walked away from both of them. It's not possible. And that shop, I used to be so angry at the world that I'd walk across. I remember the one time walking across the shop floor and just screaming at him, trying to think that I could make God angry enough to kill me, to take me out of this world. If you're so all powerful, why don't you take me? Why don't you send me to hell? I was just so angry with the world. And a couple times I was in motion. I remember the one time, when I was walking across the shop floor, I blinked my eyes and everything went black and cold. And it felt like a cell door slammed on me. And it felt just like I was all alone in a place. And I remember thinking, I pushed him far enough. He did it. And it felt like 5 minutes, but it was a blink of an eye. But it felt like 5 minutes of being there. And boy, I tell you what, that's kind of a wake up call, because, I used to say that, and then a little while later, I'd say, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. So I did believe in him still. I believed that he had that power. But in my world, in my head, I was hurting so bad that I just didn't see any other way out. Reaching out, I wasn't educated to know what PTSD was. Even as an assistant chief and on the fire department, they never talked about PTSD. And I had all the symptoms.
If I can go back and you say, you're angry with God, can you give me a little background on your beliefs, on your faith, on where that comes from and what that kind of looked like either with you growing up or when that came into your life or anything like that?
I was always brought up in a church, Lutheran church. Parents made me go to church, made me get confirmed.
Ah, yes.
So, I went and got confirmed and all that stuff, and, heard all the Bible verses, most of them. I've never read the Bible. I've read it, but not completely all the way through. So, I did believe, but then in the darkest days, it's like, how can you be doing this to me? Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why can't I have a successful life? And why do I have to feel this pain? I don't even know what this pain is, but it seems like everything was breaking that I touched mechanically. And it's like, why can't I get a break? It's like, why are you doing this to me, God? And I said that so many times. Why are you doing this to me, God? And it got to the point where all I could do is just sit there and laugh about it sometimes, because there was nothing else I could do about it. I felt like I was losing my mind.
Have you ever heard the quote that kind of goes around that anger is really just masked grief about what you wish or thought should happen but didn't happen, and that's kind of what anger is? Have you ever heard that before?
I haven't heard that, no. I could see that, though.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a bit about, God, why is it this way? Why is it happening this way? I'm curious, what was your expectation that you had prior to jumping into, fire service, or the calls that made you question, God, why are you doing this? What did you think before that compared to your worldview after jumping in?
Well, I don't know if I was really all that religious. I went to church on Easter and Christmas, things like that. I wasn't going every Sunday, and I still don't. But I think I was just drifting through life. Even the things I seen in the fire service, I was more blaming myself and my skills. I'm trained
I see.
to help people, and the fire department, we go through all this training, and we do it just the way they say. On drowning victims, we get them out in a certain amount of time. They're young, ice water. They're supposed to be alive. That's what they told us. We can save them and give them CPR, and they can come back, and it wasn't happening. So it's like, why is this happening to us? And it seems like you see the success stories other places, and when they're teaching you this stuff, they say, you do this, boom, 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 and this is how it's done, and you save lives. But we had a really bad streak, and we had crosses on every road leaving Frazee, and that's hard to see when you multiple crosses. I mean, you couldn't even leave town without seeing what I considered a failure. I failed. They died. I was on that call. I started blaming myself, and they talk about moral injury some too, and I blame myself that I must have done something wrong. And that's where my world and my mind started twisting around. Was I failed. It was me. I'm the Grim Reaper. I'm jinxed. People shouldn't be around me. So I started isolating, and I focused on all the negatives. I kept a scrapbook of the fatalities. I didn't keep a scrapbook of any of the successes, just the fatalities. And I didn't even put two and two together till afterwards.
Okay, so you got to walk me through this one. A scrapbook of all the fatalities. What does this look like? How does this come together?
Newspaper clippings.
I
the
see.
Fatalities, I'd keep the newspaper clippings of the fatalities. And it was, how cold are you that, that's where my mind went, was death. And it kind of goes, we found out that it goes all the way back to my dad. My dad was 50 years old when I was born. And he had some illnesses. He had gout, kidney stones, minor stuff. And I thought he was dying. And he seemed like this old person, like he's my grandpa's age, is what he should be. And so I just told myself, he's going to die someday, and I don't want to get hurt. So I pushed him away. And in doing that, I pushed a lot of people away. I just focused on death through most of my life. And then when I got in the fire service, wow, here's all these people dying. It's like, this is all we have to live for, is to die, instead of saying, I got to live my life today because tomorrow's not guaranteed. I got to thinking, well, I'm probably going to be dead tomorrow, so who cares?
So, and on top of that, was there anything else on top of that with the meth that you were doing? Sounds like you were very involved in going to every single call that came out at the fire department. Is there a reason for that? Did you just feel like you were on the hook for everything, or is, nobody else would take that spot? Is there a reason you kind of try to go to everything all the time?
Well, I worked pretty close to. I worked in town, which in a small town, a lot of people work out of town during the day, and I could get down to the fire station pretty quick. Did a lot of auto extrication. I helped train a lot of people in auto extrication. So my heart was there too. I wouldn't turn over and say, oh my God, it's 3:00 in the morning. I got to get to work at 6. I'm not going to make this call. I need my sleep. I always got down there and did what I had to do. And, I gave it 110%, because, a lot of times, especially during the day, we don't have all the fire service people in town. So, what we can get, we need every one of the bodies. So, but my heart was in it back then. Once I started getting the side effects from the PTSD, which is interesting, because I don't want people to mistake what I say, but the meth actually kind of bought me some time in life, if that makes sense. It numbed me. It was a horrible, horrible thing, but it gave me time enough to find out what PTSD was. The PTSD, I think, was the main thing. The meth definitely didn't help with my anger.
Right.
My finances, the meth didn't affect my finances because I just worked more hours. So it was weird. So in my mind, I'm justifying all this stuff. Like, it's okay, because if I do one more billable hour, that pays for my meth. So, and I'm making deals with the devil, basically.
Yeah.
Robbing from Peter to pay Paul.
So that auto shop is one of the, that's a 24-hour auto shop, huh? That's impressive. Most of them close at like 6:00. So you're open all night.
Well, I had the doors locked all the time, though. That's what's weird.
Right.
And my windows were blacked out. I ran my auto shop on surveillance cameras.
Oh my.
I'd open the door for the people I wanted to work on their cars, or customers, or the parts people, or people I knew. But my windows were all blacked out, and people actually, somebody tried to break into my shop twice, and I was in there in the middle of the night working. But it was so blacked out, you couldn't tell I was in there.
Gotcha. So take me back. The auto shop, obviously, we talked about that with the low point and the suicide attempt, and we're doing the meth. We're dealing with PTSD. We're dealing with extricating people from cars that we know. I'm assuming, I don't really want to get into it unless you want to get into it, but the drowning, trying to revive somebody, that was probably somebody you knew as well. We're dealing with all of this. Bring me to that auto shop. Bring me to the night that you talk about quite a bit with the suicide attempt and deciding finally that you've had enough.
It was actually during the day. I went over I went over to see my ex-girlfriend, and this is 2 years. This is in 2014. This is 2 years after we separated. We still were talking and things, and I was still a jerk, but I try to keep in contact with my kids, and be part of their life and things. But I went over there and I just got angry again. And on the way down to my shop from there, which was only a couple blocks, I remember telling myself that this is it. I'm going to do it. And something else crossed my mind that I haven't talked about yet was that in that final year, I had actually created a hit list of people that it was going to be if I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to take some dirtbags out with me, what I consider dirtbags, people that were not, anywhere close to upstanding citizens, people that were getting away with stuff. And I was going to see if I could take some people with me. And it sounds horrible. But that's when, on my way down to the shop, I had a sense of clarity. And say, Scott, who have you become? You're going to go kill people. What's that going to do to your kids? You kids are going to be living in that town. I mean, the whole country is going to hear about this. You're going to destroy everything.
At this time, your kids were living with your ex-girlfriend, or were they living with you?
No, they were living with my ex-girlfriend.
Okay,
it was July of 2014, and that's where I just kept driving down to the shop, and I said, I got to destroy this monster I've become, because I'm thinking about killing people. That's not right. And I just sat down at my desk and reached into my drawer and pulled out my 44 Magnum and held to my head and pulled the trigger. I had about $1 million worth of life insurance policy covered under plastic on my desk that was laying there for months. I had it planned up to that point. And the carelessness, I wasn't doing much with the fire service anymore. But if I was on a fire scene, I wasn't afraid to jump into a house that was fully engulfed. I wanted to die a hero. And when that wasn't working, it's like, okay, I've got to stop this person because I've become a monster. So I pulled the trigger and the hammer came down and just clicked. And it had freaked me out, because that's when I really sat back and I was literally up against the wall on my desk. And what did I just do? I was looking for my body on the floor. I'm like, this gun doesn't fail. It was a revolver, no safety on it. And it's like, what just happened? Why did I get to this point? I was shaking so bad, and it scared. It was the worst part of my life, being to that point where I thought I was better off dead and people around me would be better off dead. It was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life, was doing that. And I wish I could go back and stop it. But, people say, well, what if you would have reached out for help? What if somebody would have helped you? It's like, well, then my story would have been different. And I might not have had the passion I do now to go out and reach out to people that are suicidal and to be able to see something in people. The presentation I do is called Seeing in Color Again. And for whatever reason, I see people that their eyes are dark, or they don't seem to have a real smile on their face. And it reminds me of who I used to be. And I'm not afraid to approach them and say, hey, how you doing? And don't BS me, because I'm going to call you out on it.
Well, so walk me back here. Let's go back to the shop. You pull the trigger. The gun doesn't go off. What happens?
I was up on the desk behind me and jumped down and grabbed the gun and unloaded it.
So it was loaded. It definitely was loaded.
Had all 6 rounds in it. Yeah.
Wow.
And they were Remingtons, if I believe. They were good. They were the good ones, not cheap CCI. Because I've had other guns where, you get some of that cheap ammo and the primers will blow up on it and they don't go off. And I looked at the rounds thinking, wow, which one's got the dimple on it? And there was no dimples on any of the primers.
Wow.
And there's no safety on that thing. It's, to get it to click, it's either got to be empty and hit steel to steel, or when it's loaded, it has to hit a primer. And you don't hear the click then, it's a bang. But I was so lost. I was ashamed of myself for what I did. And I started thinking about my kids a lot. I sat down on my computer keyboard and my fingers danced across the keyboard. And I typed in drugs, anger, nightmares, and flashbacks on a Google search. And when I hit enter, the whole screen just lit up PTSD. And I remember, just like this, I remember sitting back and it's like, yeah, right. I can't have PTSD. I've never been in the military. I thought PTSD was a military thing. And when I opened up the Mayo site, Mayo, Minnesota, the Mayo Hospital site, and looked at the symptoms, it's like, oh my gosh, there it is. I've got them all. And then it also said high risk veterans and first responders. And at that time, 18 years in the fire service, and we didn't do any trainings on PTSD or mental health, none. And here I find out that first responders are taking their own lives, more than line of duty deaths. And we never talked about it. So I started doing a little research on PTSD and found out that the therapy was there and that people reached out for help and got help. There was help out there. There wasn't a whole lot in 2014 on the internet, which was really surprising. Back then, I found more from Canada than I did in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
And so I just basically did research all day and all night because, again, I was on meth. I wasn't going to go to sleep. And I just had this happen, and it's like, this really freaked me out. So I studied it all, and that was, pretty much, probably 20 some hours of just searching Google for internet and finding PTSD.
And this is were you just sitting in the shop after what had happened, Googling this?
Yeah. And the gun laid there the whole time. The shells were out of it. But
yeah.
I just kept, I didn't understand what just happened. That gun should have went off. It's like, what? I was freaking out. And sometimes I'd sit there and just stare at the gun and think, did that really just happen? And I remember there was a box of BBs from a BB gun that was in that same drawer. And I got looking in there and I'm like, was there a BB in there somewhere caught up in the hammer somehow? Or, I was trying to figure out there must be a way that this thing misfired and didn't go off. And actually for a long time, I was trying to find a way to explain why it didn't go off, but I never did come up with anything. But I studied PTSD, and all night long at 8 o'clock in the morning, I woke up. I'm sorry, I didn't wake up, but 8 o'clock in the morning, I went over to my ex-girlfriend's apartment. And I remember her opening up the door after I knocked on it, and she just opened it up a little bit because I yelled at him really bad and said a lot of suicidal stuff. And I barged my way in, and I had my arms in the air. And it was the passion of finding out I had PTSD, and I had to share it with her. It's like, I found it. I got PTSD. I've got the symptoms. This is the anger. It explains it all. I said, I've got PTSD, and I'm swinging my arms, in excitement. And she was backing down the hallway with our two sons behind her. And that's something I'll never forget because our two sons were looking around her, and she was protecting them from me. The kids were scared to look on their face. I'm sure they thought I was there to physically hurt them, that I lost my mind because my arms and my passion of finding out that I had PTSD probably mimicked a lot of that anger when I was waving my arms in the air before. And again, I never physically hurt them, but that day I think I probably really, really scared the crap out of them.
Well, looking back at that day, obviously, how did that end for you that day in there with them, yelling at her, excited on your part, scared on their part? Where does that come to a close that day?
I left the apartment and I was really confused. I was in a really low part of my life that day, and I remember driving down to the shop thinking my kids will never trust me. They're scared to death of me. They think I'm going to hurt them physically and kill them or what, they're scared of me. And I went down to the shop and I had to walk around the end of my desk and the gun was still laying there. And I thought to myself, I might as well just finish this. I'm too far gone. I mean, I got PTSD and I'm looking at the symptoms, but nobody even believes me. I'm trying to explain what's going on in my life and nobody's listening. But I sat down and started making some phone calls. And I had a list of phone calls I had gathered over the years of helplines. And the first one I called was a nationwide suicide hotline. And I called it 12 times and nobody answered. And
nobody answered the National Suicide Hotline?
The one I called back in 2014. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I don't know if I had an old number or what the deal was, but I called it 12 times and nobody answered.
Wow.
And then I called 3 other hotlines that were set up for first responders that I had received from a chief 5 years earlier. And I finally got around to calling them. And I called those, and again, they were disconnected, no longer in service. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? I need to talk to somebody, and who do I call? So I called a friend of mine that was a police officer. And he was on duty, and I said, hey, can you come over here? I need to talk to you. I said, I just tried to kill myself. I said, I think I got PTSD. I need somebody to talk with me and somebody to go over and talk to my ex-girlfriend and tell her what PTSD is and tell her that there's therapy out there. I need her to understand that I can get help for this monster that's inside me and I can become a normal person again. And his response was, Scott, we're going to come get you. We're going to pick you up. We're going to take you to the hospital, which is protocol.
Yeah.
But in my mind, all I heard him say is, Scott, we're going to lock you up. We're going to come take you. And the ER is not, I mean, I know the nurses, a lot of the nurses, I knew the nurses back then. And, who else is going to know about this? Now law enforcement is going to know about this. I'm going to be labeled as a crazy person. And in my mind, that's all I could think of is they're going to cage me up like an animal. They're going to put me in some psych ward and just want to talk with somebody and have them help me work my way through this without, getting locked up. And again, my mind was not in a good place. But I talked with them for a little bit and I told them I had 2 other phone numbers and I was going to call those. And if they didn't work, then he can come pick me up and we'll go to the hospital. Unfortunately, when I hung the phone up, I had no intentions of going with him because like I said, all I could think of is, oh my God, he's going to take me to the psych ward, which it's not like that, but I didn't know that back then.
Right.
And so I made the next phone call, second to the last phone number I had on my list, and that was to a first responder. I'm sorry, it wasn't a first responder line. It was a phone number that we had on our whiteboard in front of our fire department in a meeting room. It was in blue marker. And it said, if you need to talk to somebody, call this number. And that's basically all they said. It's like, well, maybe this is what they're talking about. And light kind of came on. It's like, this is probably what they're talking about. So I called the person. And it was like an EAP. I don't think it was an official EAP, and I called it, and the gal answered, and I told her that I tried to kill myself. I said, I'm pretty sure I got PTSD. I said, I need to talk to somebody. I'm very suicidal. And she helped me set up an appointment for a week and a half out.
Oh, geez.
And I made that appointment with her. And again, this is back in 2014. I mean, things have changed a lot in the last 10 years, but
yeah, absolutely.
I made the appointment, hung the phone up, and I remember looking at my monitors and looking outside, and it was a beautiful day outside. And I remember seeing the blue sky outside and thinking that I was not going to see another sunset. And that used to be one of the things I loved doing was when I was at my shop, watch the sunset, whether it was sitting outside watching it or, out back or on my monitors and watching the deer and things like that. And I just remember how helpless I felt and I didn't have nothing left in me. But I called the last phone number on my list, and it was to a national first responder hotline. And when I called it, I'd lost it. I mean, I said, I'm suicidal. I'm going to kill myself. Nobody cares. I need help. But, again, I felt like it was already too late. I don't even know what drove me to call that last number other than I knew it was the last number. But when it rang twice and the person answered, and it was a first responder, it was a firefighter from the East Coast that answered, a captain. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, first off, somebody answered. And then when I was screaming into the phone, he goes, Scott, we've got you. We'll get through this together. And it felt like he reached through the phone and he was holding me in his hands. He said, I understand PTSD. Other first responders have had this. We've worked our way through it. We'll get you some help. It's like, that's what I need to hear. I need to hear somebody else that understands it and gets it. You know, the word gets it. And we talked for a very long time. And he got me out of that mode. Suicide, a lot of times I feel, unfortunately, you know, we don't always have the answers because we can't talk to those that have ended their life by suicide. We can only get the information from the ones that have attempted and are still around. But, you know, it seems like it was like a 5 to 15 minutes window where I'd get so frustrated where that's where I'd get to that point where I'd want to end my life. And he helped me talk my way through that and get me into a better place and just let me know that I was not alone anymore. He was there for me and he'd answer the phone for me anytime. And then he gave me 2 other phone numbers. One was for a fire chief in New York and another one for a police chief in Chicago. And I could call them anytime and someone would answer the phone and just listen. And that made all the difference in the world. That was the turning point. You know, first off, understanding that I had PTSD, you know, and it's like, I kind of knew before I was even legally diagnosed that I had PTSD. I mean, it's right there. It made all the sense in the world. Right. But then having somebody I could talk with that understood it and listened and was an equal, was a peer, not somebody that never had it or, you know, just had a big diploma on their wall and big office and telling me how things should be. Well, I want somebody that's experienced it to be able to talk with me. And
gotcha. So they, just in talking to him that night, that last phone number for that 5 to 15 minutes or however long that took, that seemed to just get you out of that mindset for that evening and kind of brought you back to clarity?
That was pretty much the turning point of everything, I think, because I knew I always had that person to talk with. You know, right. Just knowing that one of those 3 were going to answer the phone. And that was, and they understood. They weren't going to judge me. They understood that, you know, I'm not alone out there, that, you know, I'm not damaged beyond repair. And they helped me find some therapists. They actually gave me a phone number for somebody in Fargo, which is about an hour away from where I live, a therapist. And I called and got an appointment the very next morning. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure that one of them called and said, hey, you got to get this guy in. He needs to talk to somebody now. And I mean, to get an appointment like that, emergency appointment, whatever it was called, and I don't know, maybe I did say I had to get in right away, or I'm guessing they said something to him or called ahead and gave him the information. But, you know, and then for them to talk about the therapies and understand the therapies. I mean, they talked to me about EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And there's lots of different therapies out there, but this one is one that they talked to me that they've had really good success with. And that it also gave me something to do because I was a Google nerd back then. So what do? I turned to internet and I started Googling EMDR and this therapy that's supposed to be, you know, the change all and supposed to, you know, go talk to somebody and they're going to put a light bar in front of you and everything's going to go away and you're going to feel great. And I'm like, okay, this is a bunch of voodoo, you know,
yeah,
there's more to this than that. But
so if, as you talk to them, I guess, as I'm listening to you kind of just give all of that came back to you, I classify it as hope. Would that be
yes,
a decent word that gave you hope that there was a way forward?
100%. Yeah. All the negative things, the helplessness, the hope, the loss of identity, all that stuff that was causing me to be suicidal, they were replacing and it's basically peer support. I mean, I know they probably have counselors' licenses and stuff like that, but they were peers also. And
so they're community. They're your community.
Yeah.
Community
yeah, exactly.
And is there, looking back, is there a reason? I'm assuming this is it, but maybe not. That you were isolating, obviously, in the shop and with the fire service. It was just kind of you in that shop by yourself all the time. Did you have any kind of close friends, a close knit community at all at that time that you were part of, or, you know, besides the bar, besides the meth, like a legitimate friend that you could talk to about anything and everything and was close to and stayed close to?
I think there was people that would have been there for me, but I wasn't able to reach out. and even the people I used to drink with, I even quit drinking. I was just doing straight meth. And it was that meth thing is a whole another program. Wow, it was crazy how I got caught up into that. And I basically was giving myself an hourly dose. I didn't measure it out or anything, but I was getting it from the same supplier for 3-4 years. So, and it wasn't cut like the stuff is now. The stuff that's going around now is I'm so glad I got the opportunity to overcome what I was going through and get clean.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the big question. You knew I was going to ask it probably. This is a faith-focused podcast, and I've been curious since you said it. The gun did not go off. You mentioned in that shop there were things that happened that you can attribute to godly intervention is what I got from that. But what's your take on that? What's your take on that as far as a spiritual base, God base goes with the gun not going off, things that happened in there? Where do you kind of see that looking back on it?
It's hard to even put words to it. I mean, there was so many times that I got what I'd call get away with it. I got away with cheating death so many times, cheating bad things from happening to me, that I tried to explain it away. And it's been really hard to accept. And I know that might sound difficult to hear for some people, but when I was going through my therapy also, that was maybe half. The therapy was maybe half of what I was going through. The other half was I reached out to a pastor, and he filled in so many blanks because I couldn't understand how I was changing so much. And it was that I was believing that I was not alone, and I'll never, ever be alone again. Where before I kind of knew that I kind of knew that I wasn't alone, but I felt so all alone because so much bad stuff was going on. It's like, why are you allowing this to happen to me? But looking back, it's like things had to happen the way they did for me to be able to get I don't know if you'd call it experience or education, but to be able to escape that darkness to help others escape darkness. Because I can now speak the language of that darkness and talk about the darkness. And when people reach out and call me, I never had people say that I had a calm voice. But when people reach out and talk to me, they say, man, you got such a calm voice. We just hear the faith in your voice. I don't quote scripture. I don't preach at people. But through my experiences and tell them what I've been through, they can pick up that, yeah, there's a higher power. There's God out there. And when I was talking with my pastor, I remember just so many things that popped out and stuck with me. But the one time I was sitting there and I said, okay, it's only been like about a month. And the therapy's worked great. And I'm feeling like I'm 18 years old and I'm feeling like I'm 100 pounds lighter. I feel great. But there's just something right here that I feel in my chest. And I said, it's a peaceful feeling. And I said, I've never felt this before in my life. And I remember him looking at me and smiling and saying, Scott, that's the Holy Spirit. And up till then, I did not know what the Holy Spirit was. I mean, I was brought up in a church. I was confused about what the Holy Spirit was until I felt it. And wow, I'm never going to let that go. Nobody can take that from me. They can take my money, my house. They can take everything they want from me, but I'm always going to have that because that's something that nobody can take from me.
Well, here's your chance, man. To everybody, I need you to explain that. What is that feeling? Can you explain it in words? Probably not. Probably not. I would doubt it, but you could try.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Peaceful, just it's an incredible feeling. And it's not always there as strong, but sometimes it gets a little weaker. But it's weird. It gives me a high that meth never came close to. That drugs or sex or alcohol or nothing has ever come close to. And I can go and fetch this thing anytime I want. When I'm feeling down, I can sit there and think, Scott, remember when you were this person back here? And remember when you were going through this therapy, and remember how much your pastor helped? Remember how it felt to sit in that room with him and have him explain the scriptures to you and what was going on? And it lights up. And being the peace, I don't know, it's better than anything I've ever felt in my life.
Well, so let's go back a little bit. So you said the therapy the EMDR, that kind of stuff was half of it. But of course, we're focused here in the podcast on the other half. So what's, you said you sat down with the pastor and he was explaining stuff for you. Give me a high point in there of kind of a conclusion that you guys came to with the other half of the piece that put kind of everything together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it was just that he was listening, and he would give me examples from the Bible of when people went through things, or and it's kind of odd because for a long time I felt like I was letting him down, because he says, Scott, that repair shop, you're helping people. He says, you've got to get back into that. He says, you got to force your way back into that. So he was coming at it from a different way, and every time I tried to work on cars, they wouldn't work. I mean, my hands, just nothing ever went good. When I do anything mechanical work now, which used to be my livelihood, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing now. And it's like God's telling me, use your mouth, use your words, use your ears, and just be around people. But I go into bars, I go have a beer, I get to just be me. And he told me one day, when I told him, I said, I kind of feel guilty because I still go out and have a beer and I still go to bars, but they're all lit up bars. They're not the dungeon ones I used to go to. I like the bright, high energy, fun, good bars. And he says, Scott, where do you think people need you the most? He goes, do you think they need you here in church, or do you think they might need you in that bar? And that's when I realized that my conversations now, when I go to the bar, and if anybody out there has ever sat down next to me, it doesn't take long for the conversation to switch to mental health or God or suicide prevention. And when you can go into a bar and people just openly talk about those three subjects and share, if they're suicidal with you, and we can move on from there. And to be able to learn different ways of going about that, because I have a service dog. He's not with me 24/7, but I kind of use him as a boundary. He's my partner. So when I go someplace and meet somebody and they want to meet in a bar, I'll have Sarge in the car, and after a beer, I'll say, hey, I got my dog, I got to take him for a walk. You want to come out and meet him? Next thing you know, we're going for a walk, and we're walking around the block, and we're 4 or 5 blocks away from the bar, and they're just talking without the alcohol. And too many times we get caught, and I know how that feels to get that crutch and you can't get away from it. And meth was mine, alcohol was mine, but now to be able to help people function without alcohol. I mean, I'm not saying they have to go cold turkey. I'm not a counselor. That's not my place. I just want to help them find a way to the next level. If it's therapy, if it's just being open and honest with somebody, if it's just having my phone number to where in the middle of the night they're feeling like they're going to end their life, give me a call, give me a chance. And the words that come out when I talk with people, it kind of scares me sometimes, because it's like, wow, I never used that word before. I don't know where that one came from. And again, that's what I say. I say I don't know where that came from, but I do.
Go ahead. You can tell us where to come from. Where to come from. Go ahead.
I've had so many God moments that it's amazing.
What else? Anything else come to your mind? Top of the list?
There's so much. I mean, my pastor, one time when I was speaking with him, and I said, I don't have a cross in my house, and I feel like I got to get a cross. And I went out to some place I was going to buy some crosses, and it clicked with me. It's like, I'm going to go talk to the pastor. He's probably got a closet full of crosses that have been given to the church, and I'll just buy one of those from him. And he said, well, Scott, they're given to the church, so we can't really sell them. And it's like, oh, I never thought of that. So we're sitting there thinking about, where I could buy a cross or whatever. And he reached up on his wall, and I try to say this without tearing up, but he grabbed the cross off his wall in his office. And it was from Ireland, when he was out in Ireland during a trip, and he gave it to me. He said, Scott, will this one do? And I can't take this. And he insisted. So I took it home, put it on my wall. And just to have him give me something like that meant a lot to me. It felt like when I had that cross in my house, it was even more so that, I was not alone. And it was just a reminder to be able to see that, to remind me all the time that I was not alone. But I went to a thrift store a little while after that, and I found this crucifix that was in 3 pieces. It was broken. And I asked if I could buy it, and the gal gave it to me. They were going to throw it out. So I took it home, got nails out and the glue out, and I patched it back together. And I got done, and I put it on the wall where that one was, and I took his back to him, and it was like a week or two later, and the spot was still there, was open, and I gave it back to him. But it was amazing how when I found that other one, it was like I pieced that crucifix back together, and that's kind of how I've been, piecing things back together as I go. We get broken sometimes, and everything can be repaired.
Yeah.
And even humans.
Well, so speaking of that, let's go there. You're in a good place.
Yes.
You've done the mental health therapies. You have the spiritual component. What does it look like now with sons? I'm assuming your ex probably stayed your ex, and maybe you've moved on from that, or maybe not. I don't know. You tell me. What does it look like now, having all of those components in place and moving forward?
Yeah, my sons for a long time distanced themselves. There was a lot of damage.
Yeah.
I hurt them a lot, and it took time to heal. But yeah, they're in my life a lot now. And my ex, I don't talk to her a whole lot, but she's forgiven me, and we've moved past it the best we can. She moved on in her life, and yeah, I went to a fireman's dance about 6 years ago, and perfectly happy being single. And I met a girl. She kind of ruined my happily single life. So
nice.
She's now my fiance, and yeah, I couldn't be happier. I mean, I've got what's interesting is I used to have a lot of material things, and I used to have a pretty good bankroll, some money coming in, stuff, and now it's like I'm just a simple person. I got an amazing dog. I got an amazing fiance. She's gonna be my wife someday, and support. She's like, those two are my biggest support right there. And I've got people from around the country that are supporting me, that I know I can call them too. And the biggest part of that is that I accept that I can call somebody, that I can reach out for help, instead of letting it simmer, for days if something goes south. And I sit there and sit alone with my thoughts thinking, I don't want to bother this person, I pick up the phone and call, because a 10-minute conversation turns it all around. And why would I waste a whole day when I could have a 10-minute conversation and come out feeling a lot better?
So it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. It isn't all magically better, but there are 2 steps forward, 1 step back moments where you just kind of focus on having that community around you. I'm assuming now from what you've said that you can reach out to at any time, and that kind of always brings you back.
Yeah. And there's a lot of heavy conversations I have, of a lot of suicidal people that are trying to end their life. I mean, actually in the moment, that give me a call, and I'm their last phone call. And it's for them to say that to me, it brings me back to where I was, So when that happens, it drains it. It almost feels like I'm giving my energy from me to them, to pick them up, to get them back out of the darkness. And it does take its toll, but I've learned a lot of coping skills too, and self-care. And just before we got on the podcast today, I was cooking up a storm. That's kind of my daily thing, is to go grocery shopping and cook, and that's my self-care. And,
nice. What were you cooking? We got to know.
I made some broccoli cheese soup, some sweet potatoes that I turned into a bisque, and some meatballs.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. So tell me this. You mentioned your sons. You mentioned you're good now with them. What was the time frame for that process for somebody else who might be going through this, somebody else who might be needing to repair those relationships? What does that look like, trying to move forward in those relationships? How did you go about getting them back and working your way back together?
It was up and down. There was a lot of rocky areas. I mean, for a year we'd be good, just really click. And then unfortunately, sometimes some outside influences that I had no control over would come in. And, there's a lot of people that just want to hurt people out there. And I just can't lower myself down to that level, and I'm not going to. And, for my sons at one time, they'd tell me they hated me, and not both of them, but one of them, basically did. And the other one, they both turned their back on me, and it was really difficult. But I also noticed that the more I pushed trying to get back into their life, the more I was pushing them away. So I just had to give them time, and it was so difficult. to be able to love somebody again, to come out of that bad, dark area and be able to give your heart to somebody in love and be able to let them love you. And then when you finally get to that point, they're pushing you away and doing the same thing you did to them. So when they talk about karma, I had my share of karma because, boy, I tell you what, and I really don't blame people. I was not a nice person to people, so I got a taste of it, a lot of it. And again, that makes me understand a lot more what other people go through too. So it is what it is. I'm not proud of things I've done in my life, but doing what I'm doing now, I'm going to make every effort to take a bad situation and make it a good one and help others. And this is my second chance in life. And this one's not for me, it's for God.
And how? So you go around the country basically speaking now about your situation and how you came back from that. Being part of the mental health community, doing all that. When you speak about God, is that kind of an accepted thing? Is that kind of a shunned thing? What's the feeling you get going to all of the retreats and the groups and the programs and stuff? Is that a component that you highlight, or is it something you kind of shy away from until somebody approaches you about it? Or how do you work that in, or do you work that in?
Sometimes it just comes out. I mean, every situation is a little different. Again, I don't go out and preach at people. I don't, shove things, shove the Bible down their throat or anything like that. It's like, this is what happened in my life. And I think they see it. They see somebody that was in a very dark place, and I'm alive now. I'm more than alive. I'm very happy. Things are going good. And that day, if I would have ended my life, how many other people would have that affected? People that I didn't even know at that time. It's just I think of it every day. Every time the phone rings or every time I hang the phone up after talking with somebody, it's like, wow. It's like that starfish story. I don't know if you ever heard of the starfish story, where the kid's walking down the beach and there's starfish that have all washed up on shore, and he picks one up and throws it out, and there's hundreds of them. He's throwing them out one by one, and the gentleman walks up to him and says, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm saving their life one at a time." And he goes, "Well, you can't save all of them." He goes, "Nope, I'm going to save this one." And you can only do so much. But a lot of times it's our actions and what we do. Back then, I was not a nice person. And I gave off negative energy. And it's reversed now, and it feels so much better than it did back then. I mean, I'm not eating myself up. My mind I've got straightened now. When I talk about PTSD, I refer to it as an infection. And it was an infection in my mind. And when I went to therapy, that was the antibiotic. It's no different than if you cut your arm. Most time it'll heal, but sometimes it'll get infected and it'll get to be really hurting and bothering you. You go get antibiotics. Well, that's the same thing with your mind. Sometimes things stick and your mind doesn't process them. And we need to talk to somebody so we can process that. And after going through the therapy, the EMDR, and learning coping skills, I'm doing, oh my God, it's so much more pressure on me now, but I'm able to handle it. And I hear people, I mean, they're basically screaming for me to save them from killing themselves. And that's some sounds that, as first responders you hear on scenes, to have it on the phone. I mean, my heart goes out to dispatchers. I can't imagine how much they hear on a daily basis, because I just do, some phone calls here and there. But to be able to process that and let it go after the call and keep going, keep moving forward.
So tell me this. I explained on my first episode kind of the reason for this podcast was that I have talked to so many people through all the peer support stuff over the years. And you kind of mentioned it. You did the EMDR, you did the therapy, you were in all of that. But it seems like when I talk to people and I start asking the hard questions and I get just a little bit deeper and get beyond the surface stuff, it seems like, at least in my perspective and in my experience, every person I've ever talked to has had some kind of spiritual component that has been included in that recovery and in that redemption. And clearly you are another person who has had that. Have you ever talked to anybody that has had lasting freedom and redemption in this situation, where they have done the therapies, they are on the medications, they are part of the groups, but that they don't have any kind of spiritual component in that pillar of redemption?
Yeah, none that I can think of, I guess. I've never really sat down and put it to paper or anything. But yeah, I guess, they have to believe in a higher power of some kind. I mean, you got to believe in something bigger than yourself, or that'll eat you up. I think back about, when the light came on for me and I started seeing in color again, and looking back at the scenes that I thought I could have changed. And it's like, who do you think you are, Scott? You can't bring people back from the dead. And, and that gets to be a lot to carry on your shoulders. But when I understood that, God's there and everything's going to work out in the long run. And, I can't play God. I mean, who am I to even think that I can, go out and change something that's already happened? Most of the time, everything was already happening way before we got to the scenes. It's always out of our control. Not always, but I mean, for the most part, when somebody's dying in a car accident, internal bleeding, I mean, you're up against the clock, and there's only so much people can do. But it's really hard to watch, and knowing that that's coming.
And so as you go out and share your story, have you ever gotten any pushback about the religious aspect of it or the spiritual aspect of it, or does that seem pretty well received once you let it out?
I haven't had any pushback. Actually, it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Just the opposite. People would come up and say, why that gun didn't go off? And it's like, well, yeah, but...
Yeah, there we go. See, I'm not alone on that one.
Yeah, no, and people come up and thank me because sometimes I talk about stuff, and when I get up on stage, my mind just goes blank and the words just come out, and people come up and say, man, I'm really glad you said that. And you mentioned God, and it's like, I did? It's like, I guess It just came out,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything, we covered a lot, but we didn't cover, any specifics on anything, any messages you had specifically to anybody who might be listening that's struggling or in a bad spot or in a bad place that you kind of want to get across that we haven't gone over?
Just if you're going through something, please reach out. Please reach out to somebody. And if you see something in somebody else, reach out to them. They might say they're fine, but don't let them get away with just pushing you away and saying they're fine. Go the extra mile. There's some artwork out there by Daniel Sundell. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but it's of a horse that's at a trough, and the trough says pure support on it. But this horse has all this rotten meat on it, and it's rotting away, and there's a demon down its back, and it's covering its eyes, so it can't see the pure support in front of it. And that's what it was like back then. It's like I had this demon in me, and I didn't want it in me, but it had taken over, and all I had to do was reach out. And, unfortunately, I had to go to a very low part in my life, and suicide's not the answer. There's PTSD, there's suicide, and there's also post-traumatic success. There's also seeing in color again. There's also overcoming things and, making a comeback, and it's a powerful feeling. And the last 10 years, things have happened in my life that I would have missed out on. And it's probably been I know it's been the best 10 years of my life.
Well, I can promise you that you are not alone, because part of that story as well for us police officers, at least in my perspective, is I would not reach out. I didn't reach out to anybody, but I did reach out to God. So that was my kind of only option there. And that kind of led from there as well to reach out to actually normal human beings and have community. For whatever reason we isolate, that's kind of where that went. So I'm with you on that. Definitely reach out. Is there a place that if people want to reach out to you, obviously the website, Facebook, LinkedIn, are you part of anything active that they would get a hold of you in?
Yeah, they can just Google my name, and there's a lot out there on the internet. Otherwise, it's seeincoloragain.com.
Seeincoloragain.com.
Yep, SEEING, incoloragain.com.
And what do you do on that website? Is that just like a booking website for your speaking, or?
Yeah, yep. And they can contact me through that, or if they Google my name, my phone number's out there. Everything. It doesn't take long to figure out.
Your phone number's out there? Oh man, you're a brave man.
Well, it's somebody was there for me one day, and to be able to be there for somebody else, my day stops. If somebody's calling me and they need to talk, that's priority. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'll do what I can. And I got some resource lines, and Safe Call Now is a good resource line. There's resource lines out there that people just don't know about. And unfortunately, that's kind of where I was at. I didn't know there was help. I didn't know what PTSD was. So education's everything too.
Gotcha. All right, Scott. Well, we have certainly taken up too much of your time today, probably, but we appreciate you being on with us. All right, guys, that was Scott Geiselhart. And thanks to him again for taking some time and coming on, being authentic and honest, and hopefully it was helpful to you in some way. If it was, would you leave a review, subscribe, even shout it out on social media for us? You could literally be saving lives and families by inviting others to hope, healing, and peace simply by doing those things and making this podcast more available for them. Hey, reminder, if you've experienced an invite to peace or have a topic or convo that you'd like to share and think would be helpful, hit me up, chad.campese, CAMPESE @gmail.com. You can also shoot me a message and connect on LinkedIn and Facebook. Next time, we've got another Scott, actually, Scott Medlin. He is both a police and military veteran, and we talk about how to know when it's time to make a change, hearing the voice of God, and being an outcast. All right, guys, here's a clip from that next episode. And please don't forget, taking a spiritually focused approach to life, to well-being, it will help you achieve life-altering results, I promise. All right, I'll catch you guys on the other side.
I was more focused on the calling of working as a police canine officer. I mean, I loved my son, don't get me wrong, but for the next year of his life, I wasn't there mentally with him. I was there physically with him, but I felt more of a drive and a passion to continue working as a canine officer. And then a year after he had, he turned a year old, and my wife and I had just been growing apart the last year. And I didn't really think it was that bad until she told me, you know what? I'm thinking about doing all of this on my own.